one of you was a marksman at 10.
Hello and welcome to the Winterfell Practice Yard. I am your host, Tim Sherm, 2016 Melee World Champion. I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Mark McLennan.
Yep, resident sounding board, player here in Minnesota, and deck building.
Extraordinaire, yeah.
Let's not go that
far. Mark is one of our kind of deck builder connoisseurs that we, in the Minnesota meta, typically bounce a lot of ideas off of. Sandy D check our decks for. And he's a real creative deck builder, and I think it's one of his stronger skills. So I brought him here today to discuss deck building considerations for building your melee decks in this new segment. So let's talk about what is the Winterfell Practice Yard and what we're going to try to do here. This is a discussion on the melee format. We're actually going to break this down into 3 different parts. The first part is going to be deck building considerations. We're going to do another recording that's going to talk about gameplay and strategy, like how to play melee. And then we're going to have a third segment that I wanted to break off and completely address on its own, and that is the kind of the wheeling and dealing and deal-making aspects of Game of Thrones melee. And the reason why I wanted to kind of break those 3 out is because I feel like each of those segments echoes or deals with a certain skill set that is unique to melee and not specifically to Joust. And it's kind of one of the key differences between those formats is kind of understanding what's going on in all 3 of those areas. So after those segments are complete, then we kind of open up the format to whatever's requested or popular demand. We could do a breakdown of a melee game, like we do Lord Commander tournaments here in our meta, and we could do a recap of one of those. We could build a melee deck kind of from scratch with new cards that had just come out. So we got a couple options after that, but I wanted to cover kind of the big 3 skill areas before we do that. One thing I want to address before we actually start with the deck building considerations for a melee deck is like kind of why we're doing this melee segment. Like, who's this for? Well, who's our intended audiences, and why does this get its own kind of podcast or video? And one of the purposes of this is to really help new players that are breaking into this format and give them kind of the common sense 101 foundations. I've been playing melee since the inception of the game, since I started playing the game back in 1st edition, and that was like 2011. I actually started with melee because I think 1st edition was originally a melee game, and then there was a Joust variant. And then 2nd edition was a Joust game with a melee variant. So they kind of flipped it in between those 2 editions. But I've been playing melee as long as I've been playing Joust. And the Minnesota meta has always had an abundance of players because we're right near the headquarters, I feel like. And that always seems to, for whatever reason, help numbers there. And we've always had opportunities where we could get 4 people together and actually play a melee game, and as I understand it, we're one of the few metas kind of in North America that regularly play or semi-regularly play the melee format. So to help new players that are breaking into this, and I observed even at Worlds, when I was at Worlds in 2016, Mark, I observed that there was a lot of people that were playing melee. It was a side event at Worlds this year. And they kind of just brought their Joust decks. They've never really seen the title cards before, and they kind of wanted to learn how to play the game. And it was like this premiere event was their first experience, or like maybe they had played it once before at home, and are trying to fill out their schedule or something like that. So
fill out their world trips, yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like it's it's brand new to them, and a lot of them brought like. I guess not competitive decks for that, and were kind of frustrated with their experience. And then a couple of them met with me in between rounds and was talking about how do you do this, and so I wanted to kind of put a little help guide in a way for them. I also noticed that in addition to the new players that were at the Worlds tournament, that there's also kind of a grouping of kind of middle tier players that know how to play Joust, have played it, or know how to play Melee, played it before. They're primarily Joust players. But they don't understand kind of what wins games, or maybe they do, but they're not too good at executing it because of that third skill set being kind of a social aspect of it.
Sure.
So instead what they do is they just kind of build something that they think is going to mess with the game state the most, and they kind of like troll these games by playing like just a bunch of stuff that just kind of messes up math, and they have no intention of winning themselves. It's not a deck that gets to 15 power. It's a deck that like stops everyone from getting 15 power. So you got to kind of win despite these people. And so if I could, I don't know, maybe steer them away from like the trolley aspects of what they're trying to do, and kind of show like, hey, this is how you consistently get to 15 and quick, and what you need to look for, and what should be in your deck, then maybe we can kind of cut down on that frustrating kind of middle tier and build up what was the last tier, which is the real competitive Melee players that are playing these decks that are basically power engines, and they're real quick, they're real consistent, and they have all the right tools kind of at the right moment, because it definitely looked like I was super lucky, but I felt like I had the right deck that day.
Sure.
And I put in the right cards, and so when they came up, it was just like, this is why this is there, and I know how to play it and how to use it, so that like that top 16, like it should be real difficult to squeeze into that top 16, because you should have about 30 some players in a large Melee tournament that really know what they're doing and bringing the hard stuff. There were
You're trying to usher people from that newbie group into that third group, and trying to thin out that trolley group in the middle. Then.
Yeah. So that's hopefully the purpose. So we're not gonna like talk about kind of fun, janky Melee decks that are really gonna screw up. We're gonna try to skip over that, at least in the beginning, and talk about like what makes good Melee decks. All right, so there's one other thing I want to address kind of while we're on this like topic, and I think one of the reasons why you have trolley players that are playing that stuff is because there's a lot less respect for Melee, and a little bit less, well, definitely a lot less popularity too. You can look at the numbers there. We were at 160 plus for Joust in participants at Worlds this year. I think we were at 53 players at the start of the Melee, so you know, we're like a third of the players. Now,
Sure.
A lot of people left and went home. That's understandable. There wasn't a card design on the line, even though there was still a trophy. So I think maybe that exiled some players that would normally do it. Were not in it this year.
Mm-hmm.
So that might have a little bit of that. I mean, FFG is not supporting the Melee format as much as it used to. And I don't know if they're looking at... I don't know if that's a cause or a symptom. I kind of feel like the numbers have kind of shrinked even towards the end of first edition. And it's also the Melee format's not really supported at the store championship and the regional level. It's only at Worlds. It's only at Stolic. It's only if you make a fan-run event that actually includes it. So I think that way it sees less play, and because it sees less play, you see less participants. So, I mean, hopefully we can, shed some light on that and try to turn that around a little bit. But I feel like a lot of people get frustrated with the Melee format, especially new players, because they feel like they have a perceived lack of control compared to Joust. Well, certain aspects of that are true.
Mm-hmm.
The game's different. In Joust, I feel like you're trying to control your opponent until you get to 15 power, where in Melee, you abandon that altogether and you're just racing to 15 power before anyone can stop you.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of thing. It's a completely different mindset. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is that you have to be a lot more flexible at a Melee table. There's just so much more to react to. There's, instead of one other player, and kind of what their aim is, kind of once you see their deck a little bit, how they're looking to win the game. Mm-hmm. Everybody's looking to win the game pretty quickly, typically at a Melee table, and so it's a matter of being able to adjust on the fly, having tools to let you deal with things on the fly, and kind of going from there.
Right, and I feel like the lack of control, like the variance hitting you, like you're not drawing characters, you're not drawing econ, is as prevalent as it is in the Joust variant. It's just sometimes you're being controlled by 3 players,
Yes.
and that's not necessarily the greatest of play experiences. Although I found some of the most rewarding experiences playing this game is winning despite 3 people trying to get together and stop me from winning, and then realize that they can't. So I feel like kind of maybe the highs and lows are a little bit more extreme
Sure.
in Melee, and some people don't necessarily like that type of experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be such a negative experience in that regard. So if you play with, like, when I sit down and play Melee with 3 other competitive players, it generally is a good time. There isn't when one player just kind of gives up and is just going to play stuff from hand that kind of screws with things, but then doesn't have a lot of characters in play, and then everyone just attacks them for free power, and then the game's kind of over before it begins. I feel like those type of experiences are because you don't have all 4 competitive players really, I guess stretching each other out.
Yes.
Right? So
There has to be multiple threats for
yeah.
everything to kind of balance out.
Right, exactly. So my hope is that through this kind of segment we can get more players up to that level. So let's move on to our first segment, which is, so that's all kind of the intro. The first segment is going to be deck building considerations. What do you want in a Melee deck that's going to let you be successful, that's going to get you to 15 power? And there was a lot of different ways we could kind of tackle the segment. We could build a very specific deck. I could go over my Worlds 2016 deck. Unfortunately, this video is coming out right as Valor hits the stage and enters the card pool and completely changes everything. So I didn't want to go over a very specific deck or try to build a Melee Valor deck without testing it really and putting it through the ringer. So I want to bring up some kind of MVP cards that I saw that helped me win in this Melee format, whether there was a Valor or not. And some I've been in some Lord Commander tournaments, which is like a Melee format tournament that we have here in Minnesota, and I've lost some key games because I didn't have certain cards in it. So that kind of bubble of cards that help you win, cards that stop your opponents from winning, is what I want to kind of focus in on first. And then after that, and we'll break that down by card type. So we'll go through events and plots and characters and all that kind of stuff. Although with characters, we're going to talk more of what makes a good Melee character, rather than do specific ones, because I think every house has good Melee characters. And if we talk about what characteristics make a good Melee character, then I feel like you could look at the card pool for any specific house and pull those cards out. So that way we don't have to sit there and cover all 7 factions.
Right.
Then we're going to talk about cards that are great in Joust, but we should probably not consider them in Melee because they don't do what we're trying to do, and that is race 3 other people to 15.
Yep.
And then we have cards that are kind of on the bubble. I feel like these are cards that you could go in and have in your deck and have a high impact in some games and could have less than desirable results in other games. So we'll just kind of leave those for last, and we'll put those on the bubble, and then we'll just kind of, if it fits what your deck's trying to do and your deck has room for it, then I think maybe you can consider playing around with a bubble card.
Yep.
Deck building also in Melee is extremely hard to do because you don't have the opportunity to test in a lot of different games and a lot of different scenarios. Like in Joust, you can slot a couple decks in, you play 4 or 5 games in a single night, and you see what the impact of those cards are.
Yep.
You can't play 4 or 5 quick games of Melee anywhere.
Yes.
Right? So, that's a whole day of tournament, and so you don't get the testing environment that you do in Joust. So, these calls got to be well rationed, thoughtful inclusions. So it's something that we kind of think about and discuss a lot in our meta. When we try to evaluate cards in a Melee variety. So let's start at the top. My first grouping of cards is they're all events, they're all neutral. All right, and I think events are real key and important in the Melee format.
Yes,
because you got 3 players that are looking at your board state and trying to determine if you can win that turn, and they can only count what they see, which is stuff you have in play. they can only guess at what's in your hand. And so with the events being in your hand, these are your surprise cards that will swing a game one way or the other. And so I don't recommend at this point building a melee deck that doesn't have events. I'm not going to go on the record and say that there isn't going to be a successful melee deck down the road that can win games without events. There might be at some point, something that just plays a ton of characters and locations and just like out aggro's everyone, right? And just wins.
What you have out is enough. You don't need a surprise, but
but I found the surprise to be very impactful, like one way or the other. Either he has it or he doesn't have it. Does he have it? How do you block this challenge if he does have it? So let's talk about these 3 neutral cards. They're all neutral. The first one is Superior Claim. This one's an obvious one, 0 cost. Win a challenge, power challenge by 5, claim 2 power.
Correct.
And it's limit once per challenge.
Right. And you can attack or defense. So it's the restrictions on it are pretty slim. It's just challenge type, and you got to win by a certain amount.
Yep. And you're usually going to go pretty ham on your challenges anyway. So like when you do a power challenge, you're probably going to throw like 13 some strength at it, right? Especially if you can beat their total 12 possible strength, right? And then they're disincentivized to try to defend all that. So usually, because they would completely kneel out all their characters, so they only block with 1 character, and then you win by 5, and that's when you get to trigger that card. Also, the other key thing with this is that it's 0 cost. You don't have to save gold. It's not, you always want to keep track of how much gold everyone has left over in challenges, but kind of the beauty of this is it's just adequate strength to go through. The next card is Hand's Judgment. It's cost X and allows you to cancel an event that is just played where X is equal to the cost of that event.
Yep. And sometimes you just need to cancel their Superior Claim and you don't have to pay anything for it.
Yep. Or cancel their Hand's Judgment after they cancel your Superior Claim, as in one of my melee events, which is, it gives you protection for your own events potentially, because you can cancel X with X
without paying anything. Yep.
Right. And it does stop someone else's, like, they're going to win the game because of this event, you can cancel it.
Yep.
Right. So I find that to be like a real powerful game changer when you have that kind of in your hand and in reserve. And there's a lot of times when I am at a melee table and I'm like, okay, this guy is swinging for a ton of strength on this power challenge. He's got 3 cards in hand. We have to assume there's a Superior Claim in there.
Yep.
Does anyone have Hand's Judgment to stop that so that he only gets the 13 power and not 15?
Doesn't win the game.
Right?
Yep.
And you'd be astonished how many times people say, I don't run that card. And it's like, you have to run that card to stop the first card.
Yep.
The first card wins you the game.
Yep.
The second card stops your opponent from winning the game, right?
Yes. If you're going to do it, you got to know that they're going to do it, so you got to be able to stop it.
Yeah, right. So that is Hand's Judgment. Now, the third one I have in here, which is an absolute must in my opinion, is the 1 cost Nightmares. This card blanks a location or character till the end of the phase.
Disruption.
My MVP kind of winning strategy at Worlds this year was to use Catelyn to swing in with a large power challenge with a bunch of renowned characters, and then play Superior Claim and know that nobody can disrupt that once the challenge is initiated, because Catelyn turns off all those triggers that would stop it. My opponent's triggers. The way to stop Catelyn from doing that is to Nightmares her in the pre-challenges action window.
Yep.
And when we start challenges and everyone passes on pre-challenge, I get real giddy because I was just like, that was the time to play it.
Yep. Right.
Now, it's possible that if I'm going second and I have Catelyn, and they could still play it at any time during the first player's challenges and stuff like that. So there's some windows where they can still sneak it in. But I mean, still, it's like this Nightmare shuts off a renowned for a turn, gets them to 14 power, and that's really frustrating.
Yep. Eddard, you're basically saving 2 power at that point.
Yep. Now, I normally use it on characters, and there's times where I've even used it on Hedge Knight, and they don't get 1 strength, which means they don't win the power challenge by 5 strength,
yep.
which means they can't play Superior Claim. They still win the challenge, but they're short, right?
Yep.
And it was just one strength that I denied. And like, who nightmares is a hedge knight, right? Like in Joust, that's kind of unheard of.
Yep.
But in Melee, it's crucial. Now, there are some locations that you would want to hit with this, potentially. The three that I can think of off the top of my head is going to be Gas and Gray, Winterfell, and Highgarden.
Sure.
Can you think of any other locations off the top of your head that you want to do?
Maybe like a small council chamber, or there's a lot of corner cases, and that's the big thing about this card is just the pure flexibility of it.
Sure.
There's always going to be a good target in a Melee game.
Yes.
And it's just a matter of figuring out what's the best target or the most important target right now. But it may be something where the rest of the table can put military pressure on a Greyjoy player, and you blank his Iron Mines, and so he can't save him, and then he ends up getting his characters chopped down with power, chopped away, and he can't win the game at that point.
All right. So a thing that sometimes is done in Joust, and let me ask you if you think this is still a solid play in Melee. Would you blank a King's Road after it's played?
That's a very tough call because it's when you're in a Joust game, you've got one opponent, you're slowing them down, which is going to in turn put you in a more advantageous position. Where if you're using a Melee guy on one particular player, you've still got the other two players you got to worry about.
Sure. And what you potentially create in that scenario is he can't get that big character out that he was supposed to, but he doesn't have another character to play. So then his number of characters he has on his board is super small, and those two other players will mine him for challenge. Like, they'll attack him, get all these unopposed challenges, clear his board before you even get to him. Right. So you don't want to create a situation on the board potentially where you got one super weak player where things can it's kind of like a top that's spinning, and then right before it hits the ground it starts wobbling real far to the left and right. And that's what happens when you have one player that has a really weak board position. They almost got to be protected at that point. So I'm not sure if I would necessarily do that unless there was like a key character combo that when it came out I'm like, oh, this is going to be gross and we have to stop this. So like if it's like Illyrio and some other character like in a Targ one, or if you know they have Eddard because
summons formed or something,
or Captain's Daughter to the top of his deck and they were going to try to spit it out this turn, then maybe that'd be a time to play it. But I think Nightmares is usually reserved for those characters or those type of locations that can either do character removal or power grab in and of themselves.
And with these categories, when you're thinking about house specific stuff, we're looking at things that do kind of what these neutral things do, but in that faction, right? You're looking for power grab, like with Superior Claim, maybe a Lady Sansa's Rose. With a Nightmares, you're looking for disruption, maybe a treachery, some things like that. So in-house events and for other card types, things that are like what we're talking about, you want to realize why you're taking them with and if they compare to cards like these, and if you're trying to just go all in on more of them, or if they're doing something more specific that you want.
Yeah. So like my start Melee deck ran Winter's Coming because that was kind of along the same lines as Superior Claim, right? I could raise the claim on a power challenge to grab an extra power, so it was just kind of 1 gold for 1 power. At the same time, and I think that was all I ran. I think I ran 2 copies of that, 2 copies of Superior Claim. A lot of people always ask, well, that's great that the card is in there, but how many copies of these cards do you run? How much should I devote to this, right? I like 3 Nightmares. I don't think there's ever a situation where I don't want Nightmares in hand that I can use to stop something from either someone from winning or something to get out of hand.
Right. Like I said earlier, it's always good. And there's such a saturation of targets in a Melee game that you're never going to be wishing you didn't have it. You're always going to be wanting it.
Now, the Superior Claim and the Hand's Judgment is a little more like I want to see these kind of mid-game. So like those first 2 plots I like to really reserve towards building my board and solidifying my position and make sure I got a little bit of power, but not too much power kind of thing, right?
Right, don't want to be the target.
Yeah, so if you get Superior Claim early and you happen to be able to trigger it, is now the time to do it because now you've got 6 power and everyone else is at 2 or something like that.
Sure.
You're going to become the target. So, like, I run 2 copies of those, but I think it's situational. I also think it's, if you are running Lady Sansa's Rose, maybe you consider not running Superior Claim. So there might be
Right.
some decks that don't run Superior Claim specifically.
But you need something that does like that. You need that power grab from the hand.
Yeah.
In order to be able to put a credible threat.
If you don't have that, then they can with accuracy, like using best case scenario, predict what your power is going to be based on what you have on the board. And when you have that transparency, you're going to be dismissed or taken seriously appropriately. And what you want is people to dismiss you when you can get that power, and not 3 people to gain up on you, because they see that you can, right? So you want that to be the surprise. All right, so that's events, and I think those are real important and crucial 3. Going on to the next category is plots. I've got Sneak Attack at number 1 here. This was my closer plot. It is the highest initiative plot printed.
Yep.
That we have at 11. We have no plots at 10. Is that correct?
I don't believe so.
And then we have Clash of Kings at 9.
Right.
And we also have Weapons at the Door at 9, I think, as well. And then we've got a bunch at 8 or 7, and then a few more at 6.
For the most part, if you're playing it, you're going first, unless somebody else is also throwing it.
Yep. There's 2 scenarios where you lose initiative with Sneak Attack, and I've experienced both of those in a very heartache way. First one is someone else runs Sneak Attack with less power than you, and if you're trying to gradually build up your power and not do it really grab a lot of power early, you should win that tie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like most of the time. So you only get the one challenge. So the claim 2, it's got to be at a target with 2 power to claim, on top of having all your other pieces ready to go.
Yep.
The other scenario is somebody plays Snowed Under with like a Salty Navigator or a King's Road, and then you get real sad. Like that happened. Like Greyjoy, I think is a pretty decent melee faction, and I can see they run a lot of printed initiative boost, so they can get away with playing Snowed Under. And to be honest, Snowed Under is still decent gold, which is like another consideration we're going to talk about here in a second. So there's no reason not to play Snowed Under if you're playing Greyjoy with all those initiative boosts. It's a great way to kind of sneak and steal initiative without really having to necessarily, like, you can play that and Sneak Attack and actually have kind of 2 punches ready to go. But yeah, Sneak Attack, I would be surprised how many times people could have gone first if they had this plot in their deck and didn't. And instead they played something that was like, I guess I play Wildfire because that's my highest initiative plot.
Yep.
And they don't actually win initiative. They end up going third, and I win going first. There was a Lord Commander tournament that Mark Seeley won, and I didn't have Sneak Attack. My highest initiative plot, I think, was a 9. I think I was running Clash of Kings, and it was just not good enough. It was routinely beat by somebody playing an 8 initiative plot with some sort of bonuses, or Cameron playing Sneak Attack out of a Stark deck, and grabbing that initiative before me. So that was kind of a lesson learned for me. So Sneak Attack. You don't have to play it if you don't need it, but it's always good, like, when you got the pieces lined up, that's the time you play it.
Yeah, and the big picture there might be the realization that, at least right now in 2nd edition Melee games, you're probably only going... Most games are over in 3 to 5 plots.
Yep.
So you have a little bit of wiggle room there in slotting something up that you...
Aren't going to play every game. Exactly right. You got some toolbox stuff, and especially with... something as simple as Sneak Attack, it's, if you're in a position to win, it may get you there. Yep.
So it doesn't hurt you to put it in where, maybe a reset, or a low gold plot that has an ability that you might want, are things that you may just never play because you're never in a position for them. Mm-hmm. You kind of want to be in a position where Sneak Attack is a good option, because it means that you have put yourself in a position to win the game. And maybe that you don't always need it because you're going to need multiple challenges to win the game, but oftentimes, when you get to a certain amount of power level and you got the characters you're wanting on the board and, events you want in your hand, then sneak attack's going to win you the game.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to close it out for you. I was surprised how often people weren't running that. And even in Stolic, I think the Stolic champ deck also did not run it. But yeah, it's an absolute closer. So the next plot I want to bring up, Calm Over Westeros. This was like my go-to opening plot because I want a lot of gold. I want to protect myself, so if I set up real weak or real vulnerable, I can kind of shore that up by taking Calm Over Westeros and taking military claim down to 0, right? Typically nobody plays a claim 2 plot opener.
Yes.
Right? And so this
makes
is
some enemies really fast with that.
Yeah. And when you do, and it's happened before, I've seen people play Famine first turn in Melee for some reason.
It's that second group we were talking about, those trolley guys. And the other thing with Calm Over Westeros is that it doesn't get hit by...
naval superiority.
Yes.
I was going to say, one of my favorite Melee experiences is 2 of us played Trading with Mintoshi, a third person played, I think it was like Noble Cause.
Sure.
And then the 4th player played naval superiority and blanked everyone's plot and then still collected 8 gold that turn and was able to get a real superior position right off the bat while the rest of us were just kind of twiddling our thumbs. It was a good call in that because I was just like, nobody's going to play that. But now with the prevalence and options of summer plots that are out there, I think Calm Over Westeros is a nice solid one. Another one kind of along that vein is Time of Plenty, which just came out. 6 gold, you get an extra card. If you grab Master of Laws title, you could actually draw 4 cards in that turn. It's a great way to kind of fill up your hand or to make sure you see your key pieces early. It doesn't, and you're not worried about initiative with these opening plots, right?
Yep.
So you just know that you are giving everyone else a card with Time of Plenty.
Yeah.
So I like to avoid the threat of naval superiority altogether and just play that. Now I still put like maybe a Noble Cause in my deck because if I do get Lords and Ladies like second or third turn and I'm like, these guys got to come out to get my renown on the board, I want a way to play them.
Got 'em.
But I feel like if you're playing naval superiority, you either play it right away or you play it right after a reset. So you generally don't see it after the first plot. So the next one I have is a winter plot to kind of counter that, and that's Winter Festival. This is kind of a category of like delayed power gain, but there's a lot of times where you get up to 13 power and you can't close, or maybe you get up to 14 and somebody takes a power away from you or something like that, and then challenges phase ends and you can still win. Right? Like people have to count if the challenge phase ends, so now they're kind of committing their strategy to making sure that you're not within 2 power of winning the game at the end of challenges, which is a little bit more intense than just not getting to 15 during the challenges. Still 5 gold, which is good.
And it's a little bit more reliable than something similar like Heads on Spikes, which is also trying to get power via the plot. Theoretically you could follow up a Winter Festival turn with a Heads on Spikes turn, that type of thing, to try to get a bunch of power after that challenge phase ends, but it's a little bit more reliable than that.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that Calm Over Westeros also shuts that off, right? So Winter Festival I don't think is a very good opener, even though it is 5 gold.
Right.
You're probably going to hit a summer plot and run into it. You also got to be careful of another summer plot called Turning for the King, which gives knights renown and immune to opponents' events, I believe.
Yes.
And that's not only is that a high initiative plot, but it's a summer plot, and so if you're trying to passively gain power on a turn that somebody's trying to give all their knights renown, it's not going to do anything for you other than get you 5 gold.
Right. Like you said, the 5 gold is important, so that's why it's a decent choice.
Yep. So the consideration is I like plots with high initiative and high gold, right?
Yep.
That's why sneak attacks are right there at the number 1. The reason why I like plots with high gold is, especially when you can combo it with Master of Coin, you don't get a long enough game to draw eventually into your econ and turn it around.
Yep.
Like you have to make sure the economy is there when you need it up front right away, and the only way to ensure that is to make sure that your plots have high gold.
Yes.
There was a plot here that I probably would have added to this consideration, but now that we're in a post, or now that Valor is released, I'm not sure if it's going to be valued the same.
Sure.
And that is calling the banners. Calling the banners, especially in the pre-Valor meta, a lot of people in Melee just didn't bother running resets, or they never played them. So it was not unreasonable to get characters, or to get players that had 6 to 7 characters on their board.
Sure.
And then you could flip this, and then you could now put your 2 big characters and a location, or 2 big characters and have enough gold to trigger all your events. That kind of stuff from a single calling the banners. Plus, it had an initiative of 6.
Yep,
so
which is pretty high for more of a setup plot than a closer plot.
It's kind of hard for me to predict the impact of Valor is going to have on Melee. But if I remember from first edition, I played a dragon deck that ran a lot of duplicates and tried to put as many saves as it could on the board, and then just let the dragons do their kind of rush, right? And it was not unreasonable for someone on second turn to play Valor, someone on a third turn to play, a different player on a third turn to play Valor, and try to get rid of all those characters and all as they survive each Valor, right? So if that happens, you're looking at player boards only having 1 or 2 characters each, which I just don't think is going to be worth it for calling the banners. I think you just might as well play a guaranteed 5 gold plot.
Sure.
At that point, I mean, even a Varys' Riddle and just see what happens there, kind of thing, or a Summer Harvest would probably be better.
Sure.
But anyway, one thing that did come up in Melee Worlds is we asked one of the judges. There was this interaction between Varys' Riddle and Summer Harvest.
Yep.
And it was between 2 players that didn't really want to screw each other over and wanted to make sure that they both had a decent economy to protect themselves that game. So there was no other when revealed effects on the board, and the judge allowed the player that played Varys' Riddle to choose an opponent that didn't have a when revealed effect.
Okay.
So I'm not going to go on the record and say like that's the official ruling, because like I feel like there's some doubt in there for me, but like he allowed him to basically not trigger the Summer Harvest and like set everyone to 2 or whatever.
Yep, set the guy to 2 gold.
Yep. So that's kind of one thing. One last consideration we have here is the use of resets. Again, we talked about there's kind of that small room at the back end of your plot deck of plots that you're not necessarily going to see every game, but you have the option of playing kind of like utility flex spots, and one of these could be a reset. Right now, our 3 resets are Wildfire, Valor, and First Snow Winter.
Yep.
First Snow Winter is good to hit those Knights decks that put a lot of renown on non-unique characters, kind of spread all over the board. And if you turn all those to hand, they lose that. But I find that those Summer Knight decks, after they get the 4 or 5 Knights into play, they usually win that challenge phase.
Yes.
So you don't have another plot to kind of send them back to hand. So I don't think Winter's Coming is that strong, and I think it also creates that scenario we talked about before where one player gets hit harder than everyone else.
Right.
And now he's the vulnerable kind of player that everyone just kind of attacks. So I don't think you want to include that. That said, I did play Valor in a lot of my decks.
In first edition?
So...
that's
I don't
speculation for the future. We got to kind of see how it goes.
Right. I did not find Wildfire Assault in second edition, either like pre-Valor, to really be effective in a Melee format. Most of the time, your power is going to be on 3 or less characters, and those are the characters you save, and it doesn't really adjust anyone's power totals.
Right. It kind of solves the same problem that First Snow Winter has, where it's taking care of those Knight decks that are spamming renown on a lot of smaller characters, but it doesn't handle where power is kind of focused on 1 or 2 or 3 characters.
Yep.
Which is usually going to be the case.
So, like in addition to all the plots that we just named there, other plots that gain you a lot of power in a short amount of time. We talked about Tourney for the King. If you're running a Knights deck where you can reasonably push out 4 to 6 Knight characters, usually cheap. that one can net you a lot of power, and you can run 2 copies of that too. Is there other plots that you can think of that give you that power grab?
We've mentioned it earlier, and it's maybe less grab, but Clash of Kings.
Yep.
I mean, you're gaining power, but the big boost there is that if you do become a target, if you're able to fend off 1 or 2 of those power challenges, it rewards you in that you basically get to take power from the opponent who attacked you. So if they're trying to just do chump power challenges to get you to kneel out your board so that someone later in the turn can, do a challenge that's really important and, may try to clear you out, it kind of disincentivizes them to do that.
And it combos really well with that title, not Master of Ships. It's the other one that gives you, I think it's Hand of the King, which lets you do 2 different power challenges and you get a static +1 power bonus. It's a great way, because now you can get 2 power from that plot.
Sure.
Maybe a 3rd on defense if somebody is silly enough to attack you where you could win on defense. So that kind of gives that a little more push.
And this is kind of cheating into maybe one of the later segments, but worth mentioning here, that title is probably the strongest one of all the 6. And if you're early in picking, even if you can't utilize it, you probably need to take it to make it so other people can't. Someone who can utilize it, because the amount of power they can gain off of that is incredible. And
because not only does it give you 2 power challenges, but it also gives you 2 different rivals as well.
Yes.
And that's usually where people don't see the large power grab on the table, right? Because that's another way that you're getting power that isn't printed on your cards. So I remember playing that, getting that title, and actually using the rival bonuses on like intrigue challenges and stuff like that, and people just completely forgot about that.
Yep.
All right, so next, after that, we're going to go into characters. There are a lot of good different characters. I think the lower the cost and renowned is usually what you're looking for.
Sure.
There.
Good spread of icons to help, so you're not just giving away unopposed because you didn't set up one of your, 6 characters with an intrigue icon or something like that.
Yep.
Which can also, they can make you a target for those intrigue challenges where you lose those events from your hand before you can play them or before they become relevant, that type of thing.
I feel like if you go light on intrigue challenges or intrigue icons here, you're going to want some sort of card draw that keeps your hand full so that you can kind of protect the good cards in your hand that you do want.
Yep.
And you're going to have to kind of make some smart decisions in marshaling. Like, yeah, you can spit this card out, but then now your Nightmares is with one other card, and they got a 50-50 grabbing it. And if 2 people entry challenge you, then you for sure lose it.
Gone for good, yep.
So, like, and you can't get that back. And no way you can get that back even in time, even if you could get it back. So I feel like that's kind of one thing that you're going to be looking for if you decide to go light on that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make a melee deck that's light on power icons. You just can't do it right now.
No, you got to have them.
And there was people that are playing landy decks that didn't have the power icons. Like, they had them focused on like 3 characters, right?
Yeah.
And if they didn't get those 3 characters, or if those characters were killed, which happened, it was just kind of like, can you put a power icon on the board? And they're like, nope. And I'm like, well, whoever goes first wins. And then there's a Greyjoy player, the head of the tide, and it was over. That kind of stuff.
Speaking of Greyjoy, another thing to look for is stealth. Stealth is really important. You can have a huge army or a giant character like Robert Baratheon, and he's not worth anything on defense if he gets stealthed. So you either need to have a lot of characters to be able to defend it, things even when your good character, best characters get stealthed, or try to have your own stealth characters that can help you deal with those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think stealth and renowned are very key keywords there. I got
a couple other things with maybe the characters.
Sure.
It looks, and there's less of them now, but there's cards coming out like Brienne, not kneeling characters, or characters that have abilities that stand themselves up.
Sure.
Core Eddard is never going to get played because the cheaper one that gives basically the second renown is just so much better.
Yeah.
But those type of mechanics, Old Bear, not that Night's Watch or a wall deck is all that competitive in Melee right now. Right. But those type of characters, like I said, Brienne is the one that comes to mind that just recently came out or is coming out soon. When they, not kneeling to defend, not giving your opponents good targets, and just the idea that you have a non-kneeling defender oftentimes just disincentivizes people and has them looking elsewhere.
Right.
You know, they're like,
the more standing characters you have,
right.
the
They're
more
not
they
putting
back
you
up.
to a decision when you have someone who doesn't kneel to defend. So they'd rather put someone else to a decision of, well, do you want to kneel this character? You know, if they come at you, it's just like maybe they can beat you, but it doesn't affect what you're trying to do.
Yep. Like Jaime Lannister is one where, like, yeah, you can trigger off that military challenge without kneeling. Jon Snow is one character that can participate in multiple challenges and not kneel.
Right.
So maybe eventually, if you can Voltron him up a bunch of attachments, give him renown and a bunch of strength,
Yep.
then he can be a nightmare because they can just do all these kind of one strength initiate all these challenges with low strength characters, but Jon Snow is also included in there, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that is a good thing to look for, kind of going forward as more cards roll out. Is if you're looking for those type of mechanics printed on there. Also, along that vein is more stuff like Catelyn, where it's, I don't know if there will be anything. Hopefully not. That's like Catelyn, where it's like your opponents can't trigger stuff when they're participating, or they can't play events or stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just always kind of keep immune to events is stronger than what a lot of people realize. Because events is usually you're like, oh, I got to stop this, and this is how I do it. And then, so like Small Council Chamber, I think, is immune to events.
Right.
So keep that in mind. You can't, we do not so.
Correct.
Can't play that on there. All right. So under attachments, I have Bodyguard and Seal of the Hand. I think Bodyguard is a great way to protect your characters for the factions that run a lot of Lords and Ladies, which right now is Lannister and Stark. But everyone has a little bit of Lords. I mean, even now in Greyjoy, you're starting to see a nice spread of Lords.
Well, yeah, almost all their power characters are Lords and Ladies.
Yep. So I think that's really good there. Seal of the Hand.
Can be expensive, but
it can win you the game too.
Yep, as we were talking about with not kneeling and those type of mechanics earlier, standing is basically the equivalent of that, and so being able to use your power characters like an Eddard, like a Tywin, like those type of characters multiple times is
real
highly
important.
valuable.
Now in a Valor meta where Seal of the Hand, I don't know. I feel like maybe it's not as good. Maybe it's expensive attachments specifically are not as good. Mm-hmm. Seal of Hand is not terminal, so it will return to your hand.
Sure.
But it's a huge investment to put Seal of the Hand on a 6-cost character.
Sure.
That's a lot of other characters you're not playing, potentially. So keep that in mind as we kind of move into this Valor card pool, that maybe Seal of the Hand and some of the other stuff is...
There are some choices to be made there, and this is maybe a little too deep for this kind of over-level discussion, right? But when you're talking about that economy earlier maybe not being there, and you need to play your plots and choose them accordingly, things like Rose Road becomes a little bit less valuable because you play it and you're not going to get that. You may not have a turn or two, so you may end up switching all those out for Ocean Roads, perhaps. Right. And so if you've got Ocean Roads out, those help you play the Seal of the Hands, the Bodyguards, and that type of thing.
Sure.
Because they reduce neutral cards. So that may be a consideration for getting those cards into play cheaper than you might anticipate.
Yep. All right, so that kind of segues into locations. The notes for locations is to try to pack as much economy as in there as possible, because you want to see as much economy early as possible, because it will make the rest of the game go so much smoother if you can put out big character and a small character, or two big characters, and if it makes your life so much easier. There's a couple times where I won melee games despite not having any locations in play, because I had all those 5 gold plots, and I was able to kneel fealty, play a 5 gold plot, play a 6-cost loyal character.
Yep.
Right? Or 2 characters that were cheap, but one of them happened to be loyal, type of thing. So I think fealty I think it's still strong as an agenda, and I think like when you look at your locations and what you want to consider, I still think you run all those econ locations. You probably don't play the Rose Road mid-game. You keep that in your hand to protect some of your events.
Yep.
But I think everything else is fair game there. So are there any special locations that we want to talk about before moving on?
Well, maybe not special locations. Maybe the first starting point is to kind of look at what we're looking for in location in general, right?
Yep.
And I think it's the same things you're looking for in those events that we talked about earlier. You're looking for power grab, you're looking for disruption, and you're looking for kind of flexible, and usually that's going to be control options.
Sure.
Something that comes off the top of my head there is like a high guard, right? It lets you either, manipulate what you're doing, or it lets you manipulate what the opponent's doing.
Absolutely.
Heavy control, big control options, and maybe this falls into more of the denial, something like Ghast and Gray there, where
Can't be saved is the key part there. So even if they load up their guy with dupes and bodyguards, it's still toast. So, that's a good one. And then Winterfell has the kind of disruption, right, where you're turning off their effects. It's kind of hard to gauge what the impact of that reaction is going to be with a lot more winter plots floating around now between Snowed Under and Winter Festival and that kind of stuff. It might be that it only shuts off the Stark players' triggers and not the actual opponent that happens to have a winter plot out that turn. So, but
it does still have the strength boost. It's
Yes.
it's kind of that dual threat of both helping to deny your opponent while boosting your own guys.
yeah. And so I also think anything that like changes math is also a type of disruption for a specific player type. A lot of people don't get intimidated by kind of recounting that math over and over and over again, and they may trust somebody else to do it for them.
Sure.
And I've seen people kind of miscount, initiate the challenge, lose the challenge after a count was declared at the declaration kind of stage of that, and then look at the person that did the miscounting and then try to gauge whether or not that was intentional. So
A little gamesmanship.
yeah, so just never rely on what anyone else says when it comes to that, and that's kind of a little bit more of a strategy kind of thing. But locations that do that, even some attachments that give you these static kind of strength bonuses that people tend to forget about. So that's what we're looking for in location.
Yeah,
right?
and you're probably trying to avoid stuff that's a little too combo heavy or results in a cost that's too high for you.
Tower of the Hand.
Tower of the Hand is probably one of the best indicators where if you've got maybe a joust deck that's built around it that's doing useful things, it might be very good, but there's 3 people trying to stop you from triggering that or being able to stop prevent it, and
You're
too much
hurting-
can go wrong.
Yeah,
and
right.
you're hurting yourself.
You're hurting your own board to potentially get rid of one of theirs. Now, in certain situations, they have a lot of power on a character, and you return one of your characters to get rid of that power.
Sure.
Which could be really good, but at the same time,
You can just open the door for another player at that
Yeah.
point. That's the maybe one of the important things to realize in a melee game is, in a joust game, you can make a trade like that because you're hurting the one opponent you have, as
Right.
opposed to just now both of you are in a weaker position and somebody else might be able to capitalize.
Yeah, and then there's another Stark strategy where you sacrifice a lot of your Stark characters to get power on Catelyn. And you hurt your own board presence to kind of boost her up. But that makes her vulnerable, especially when she's there by herself. And I think, March to the Wall is still a plot. I see it get played a lot less because there's not the resets that kind of precede it. But, at the same time, someone's going to play it. And probably one of those trolley characters is going to play it. And, you don't want to ever get yourself down to where you only have one character. So
Right.
So now that we've kind of covered locations, we're going to move over to a section of cards that we think are good in Joust, but not necessarily all that good in the Melee format, or should be evaluated or looked at differently in the Melee format. There's a couple cards that kind of come to mind, and the one that I see in a lot of Joust decks is Milk of the Poppy.
Yes.
And I think Milk, if you're running 3 Nightmares, or if you're running at least 2 Nightmares, Milk of the Poppy is kind of, it has that same effect, but only on characters. And yes, it lasts for more than one plot, but there's not that many plots or not that many rounds in a melee game. So and it's accounted for when people are doing their math at the start of the challenges phase. They know that character's blank, and they plan around it. Where with Nightmares, they could commit themselves to a challenge, then get nightmares, and then realize everything kind of falls apart after that.
It
right?
also is a bit of a victim to positioning and initiative. If you have the milk of the poppy in your hand and you end up getting either you choose or someone chooses you to go first or second, you can't play that round on characters that other people are going to marshal that round,
Yep.
which may be the important characters that turn or for the next phase or turn or two. And so you not being able to have that on those characters is really important because it's just kind of sitting there and not hitting the impact cards that you need it to.
Yeah, when you need it to. So I would say that's kind of one thing. That was the first 3 cards that actually came out of my deck, and I just swapped them out for nightmares. I said, okay, this is the high impact, and
There's that flexibility we're looking for.
Yeah.
You got to be able to account for stuff on the fly.
And other cards are that are powerful in Joust that will make you a target and in Melee. Like Ice is a 3-cost, kind of very expensive attachment for Stark that can, if you win a power challenge, you can trigger it, you can kill any character.
Military challenge.
Yeah, military challenge, right? And you can kill any character with that, right? So that's fantastic, but it makes you a target,
Yeah.
right? Everyone's just
It draws fire.
Yeah, so next thing you know, your character's knelt, blanked, everything else, and people overcommit on defense to try to stop that as much as possible. Sometimes you can't stop it.
Mm-hmm.
There was one game where I think I had Master of Ships, Ice, and a Winter's Coming, and used it to do 4 different kills,
Yeah.
in a single turn, which was fantastic. But then you create a situation where that player is super weak and everyone minds them. So, the game isn't necessarily Melee isn't necessarily about killing everyone else's good characters permanently. It's about temporarily disabling them while you rush to 15,
Yep.
right? So I'd say Ice is nice for the strength boost, but you want to pay 3 gold for
And you also,
+2 strength.
if you use it on somebody, you basically make an enemy. If they feel like they can't win the game anymore, they're just going to try to, oftentimes, punish you, do their challenges at you, kind of, do attrition so that you can't win anymore.
Right.
It's less more about them winning now and you not winning.
Yeah. What other target cards that put a target on your back? You feel when this hits the table? I think Tyene is
Yep.
another one.
Yeah, oftentimes it's targeted kill or targeted control.
Yep.
You're much better off using something, like a good example of a card that isn't outright threatening is something like Marjorie.
Yep.
You can still manipulate challenges. You can, that 3 strength oftentimes will let you take someone who is about to lose,
Mm-hmm.
if they're at least defending the challenge, and turn them into a winner, right?
Yep.
And so you're not outright threatening, hey, I'm going to kill your guy, or I'm going to, disable your ability to win. I'm just going to monkey around with the math and change your plans or affect your plans.
Sure.
And it's a lot easier to make deals like that. Like you said, you're not removing somebody's options to win. You're just kind of changing how the game is playing
You're
out.
adding options
Yep.
for you to win,
Mm-hmm.
or for people you need to win. Because I think you can use it outside of challenges that you participate in. for
Exactly,
Marjorie,
right. Yep.
So 2 Marjories could help boost a specific Night of Flowers that's needed to stop somebody else from winning a game.
Exactly.
So I think a card that doesn't necessarily fit in this category, but I kind of want to bring it up, is Crown of Gold.
Sure.
Because that card doesn't stay in play and create a lasting effect that everyone is like, it's usually fire and forget
Yep.
kind of thing. So I think that one's okay for the most part, but you can put it on a high strength character to really neuter that character at that point.
But
The
it
attachment
also
removal is, it's likely they're going to stay.
Yeah, I don't know that I like it in a melee deck because if you do use it and kill somebody, it can make you a target, and it's not getting you closer to winning the game.
Sure.
And that's maybe something.
And it's 4 gold. You're not investing in a character to help your board stay.
Exactly right.
Okay. That's fair enough.
Yep. And that's why something maybe even like just put to the sword is something like that, but it costs you a card and 2 gold.
Yep.
And killing that character may keep someone from winning. It may not though.
Yeah.
That type of thing, and all the ways you can challenges can get redirected, and there's strength effects.
How upset would you be if you finesse this challenge to play Put to the Sword to get rid of a Balin, right, with no dupe that had 2 power on it? And you're like, yes, and then I play Risen from the Sea.
Right.
And you don't run Hand's Judgment because you don't have room for it.
Or
because
you
you're playing
didn't
Put to
draw
the
it,
Sword.
and then nobody else is too interested in canceling that because they want to keep their cancels for
Their
people
stuff.
trying to stop their stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think those. Another card is like Gates of Winterfell. I think you're running too many neutrals in melee decks right now to make Gates of Winterfell be an effective card draw.
And it's also kind of a delayed boost, right?
Yeah.
Where, you may get it, you play it, and then you get that card back that turn.
Yep.
But it didn't help you
This turn.
that turn.
Yeah.
And you're hoping that card, you draw helps you the next turn. So it's kind of a delayed thing of it doesn't help get you cards until a turn or two later.
Now, kind of along the same lines, but I think a different impact would be the Mander, right? I think the Mander would be good here because you could potentially draw into events that you could play, right?
Yep.
You could top deck with a Mander draw Superior Claim, and still have 1/5, and you're still in the reaction.
Exactly
window, so
right.
you can keep playing it. So I think like that's a different version of that kind of card effect, but is more helpful.
Right, and it fits because, like you said, you're usually going to be trying to win challenges by 5 or more to try to trigger those events, and you are getting instant card advantage there, right? You pay 1 card to play it, and then you're getting 2 back when you do it. So it's more cards immediately than you would have had before. It's not just replacing itself that first turn if you do manage to get the trigger.
Do we want to move on to the bubble cards?
Sure.
So these are cards that are kind of... They're very impactful, but there are situations where they could be bad, so it's kind of like you play them at your own risk. You include them in your deck at your own risk. I talked to Brandon Zimmer, who was at the final table with me at Worlds this year, and he said there was a card, Tears of Elise, which is a 1 cost, just win an intrigue challenge on attack, and put a poison token. And then
kill that character later.
It's a delayed kill, right? It doesn't help you win. It's not Power Rush. But he was surprised at how often that was able to work early game, right? Because power icons are kind of weak across the board.
Intrigue icons.
Intrigue icons, excuse me.
Yep.
And there was a lot of military power renowned characters on the board that made perfect targets.
Typically
for it.
That's what the characters with renown are going to have.
Yeah, so he was able to, if he drew it early, he was able to take out a Blackfish or an Eddard and keep them off the board the entire game from just like an investment of 1 gold on 1 card, right?
Yep.
So that
which can be pretty valuable.
Yeah, but then I feel like there's turns where it's just like, well, he's going to win. He can have as many poison token counters on his characters as he wants, but he's going to win before the end of the resolution before that goes away.
Yep, doesn't take him away
so
right away.
you really have to like play a delay game to really stop people from winning in the challenges phase so that all your kind of poison tokens can do what they're supposed to do.
Sure.
So I feel like that's a bubble card for me, right? Another one I would put in this category is Dragon's Tail. I see Dragon's Tail in a lot of decks. I remember when that card was not spoiled, but when we unpackaged it, right?
Yep.
In the chapter pack review, we're like, this is a melee card because you can make a deal with this. Well, people were playing Dragon's Tail. They were making deals. The deals weren't all that great. They didn't last very long. They didn't help anyone. And a lot of times you play... The person who's playing Dragon's Tail just nets a card, right? Because they get 2, but they had to play 1 to get it, right? The person that receives the benefit from it gets 2 cards.
Yep.
And so you may make a deal like, don't attack me, I'll give you Dragon's Tail. They do that. They get 2 cards that helps them win challenges against you.
Right.
They decide to backstab you and do it anyway because it gets them the win, right? Like, boosting an opponent like that, 2 cards can be big.
Yep.
I think almost too big for me to...
The card has to be important to your strategy enough where you need to dig for specific cards.
Yep.
Or, you're trying to just like get down to a very core amount of cards and whatever you need to do to dig into them.
Yep.
So that's important. The deal making aspect of that card has to kind of be secondary and more of once you get to the table, you realize you can make a deal with it if it's prudent and kind of go from there. But it shouldn't be the reason you put it in the deck.
Correct. And I think for efficiency decks that are just trying to power rush and do what they do very effectively and early, I don't think Dragon's Tail help. I'd just rather have the good card instead of Dragon's Tail to get the card, right?
Yep.
And I think like combo decks that are really trying to get like, I need this character, this location, and this attachment, and then it's bonkers.
Yep.
It's lights out. Then I think Dragon's Tail is kind of that kind of move through your deck card draw that might be all right. I got Street of Sisters on here. This is a location that's power grab. So kind of our definition of locations.
Yep.
This is something that you'd want to consider putting in your deck. It's 1 cost. It's neutral. It's easy to play. It's easy to set up. It's but it's on the board the entire time, so people can basically plan around it.
Yep.
And they can include that in your potential power gain per turn.
Which at times can make you seem like more of a threat than you are or
Yep.
want to seem at that point.
You
So-
may have no intentions of doing any challenges, let
Yep.
alone a power challenge by 5 strength, and somebody's like, well, if he triggers that and he happens to have something in his hand, he could win, and then everyone dogs after you.
Mhm.
And so that's why I like this. I prefer the surprise over kind of the built-in threat of that every turn.
Yep.
But
It is very close, and there's a lot of times you would find yourself playing it, but
counter argument to that though is it does shorten the field you need to get the win, right?
Yep.
A lot of times you need to win your challenge phase. You need to gain 8 power in a single challenge phase in order for you to win,
Mhm.
which is a lot. And this shortens it to 7.
Yep.
Right. So, at like that stretch, that home run stretch you need to win the game is shortened by stuff like this. It's shortened
Mhm.
by renowned characters that are on the board, and it's just like.
and it's not as much power as say Superior Claim, but you can set it up, that type of thing.
Yep.
So it's a bit of a deck balance thing you're looking for there.
Yeah, I think that one is a bubble.
Yeah,
Bubble
because
card
it's
for
not
me.
as good as a Superior Claim in terms of just getting power, and it's not as good as a Renowned character because it doesn't actually help you win the challenges.
Correct.
And so it is good power grab, but it's one of those tough choices.
It's a lot more playable, in my opinion, than Small Council Chambers, which is
Sure.
gain a power. That card gains a power on Intrigue.
Yep.
Right.
You also can't forget that it does have a faction nail, so if you're playing fealty, it's less useful.
Yep.
That type of thing. Or if you're doing other effects that require you to nail your faction card,
Sure.
always got to look at those as well.
Yep. All right. So I think those are kind of all the card areas that we kind of wanted to discuss. I hope you enjoyed the segment that we did here today. And if you guys have other cards that are like must-have melee cards or must not include melee cards or other bubble cards that you'd like to discuss, you can sound off in the comment section below this video, and we can have that card discussion there. This is kind of meant to open up that type of discussion. I hope you enjoyed the segment, and stay tuned for the next one where we discuss gameplay and strategy. Thank you for joining us.
Make sure you have an intro and outro. That's
The intro being like, welcome to the
Yeah.
Winterfell Practice Yard. And then the outro
And you can have
is
a
like,
tagline
thanks
if you
for
want.
joining us.
yes.
See you next time on the Winterfell Practice Yard.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Put your thigh up against this post.
Thigh on post.
That's not.
Thigh on post, sir. NPR Radio.
And no Tim lean.
No
On this
Tim lean. Where I lean back?
Yeah, and you cross your arms and lean
Yeah.
against the wall in the corner.
Or we can go really tight.
That's right. Real tight. Just edit that.
That sounded better than I thought it was gonna. I don't know what I'm gonna look up here. I know most.
Yeah.
If there's cards I don't know them. I'm not the one who won Worlds.
Yeah.
I'm just
That's
the guy
scary,
here to
right? I'm
provide
supposed
some
to know
difference.
that. Because like a card that I kind of
I'm gonna kill myself drinking this water while we're recording.
there's too many ice cubes.
No, I just don't
Do
know.
you guys want a beer?
I just don't know.
Instead?
No.
Alright.
I don't know how
I'm
to
fine.
swallow. I've forgotten.
How to
I
swallow?
don't have enough practice.
Okay. Me my mo, my me may may.
I mean, you can always edit that in, but it sounds a little awkward.
Sure. Or edit a pause in there or something like that.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Do you have your keys?
Yes.
Don't need last time. I had to let him back in.
All right, so now we're a minute and 12 in. Let's get started. This is the Winterfell Practice Yard.
Hold on.